Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In my last video, I hopefully sparked some interest about spectroscopy among the amateur astronomy community. If you missed it, I will put a link to it right here. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at StarX, my DIY 3D printed high-resolution spectrograph. I will show you how it works, and I will answer some of your questions and maybe debunk a few myths about spectroscopy. I'll also share a few resources that you might find helpful if this all sounds interesting to you. All right, let's get started. This is a fairly classical spectrograph. Let me show you how it works using this diagram. The light from the target, focused by the telescope, comes from the left side of this diagram. The first optical component that it encounters is the slit, which is a very narrow opening, only a few microns wide and a few millimeters long. The telescope must be focused so that the slit is precisely positioned at the focal plane. Here you can see what a spectrograph slit actually looks like. This is a 10 micron slit sold by Shellac Instruments. It is a reflective surface, tilted at a shallow angle, and if you look closely you can see the extremely narrow opening. Next comes the collimating lens. Its role is to collect the light coming out of the back side of the slit and generate a parallel beam of light, which is essential for the next optical component, which is the diffraction grating. A diffraction grating is a reflective surface that sort of looks like a mirror, but it generates some iridescence. At the microscopic level, it is made of extremely fine parallel grooves that cause the light rays of the incident beam to interfere with one another, so that each wavelength is reflected from the grating at a slightly different angle. The reflected light is then focused by the objective lens to form an image of the spectrum of our target onto the camera sensor. The design of the slit makes it possible to include a guiding module, which is essential if we want to capture the spectrum of dim targets, because exposures of 15 to 30 minutes are not uncommon in spectroscopy. Let me show you how the guiding module is integrated into StarX. While the light from the target makes it through the slit, the remainder of the field of view gets reflected by the aluminized surface of the slit. That reflected light then encounters a small secondary mirror, followed by a set of lenses which form an image of the slit onto the sensor of the guide camera. In the next video, I will show you what an image taken with a guide camera actually looks like, and you will see how incredibly narrow the slit is. I will also show you how I point the telescope to the target, how I center the target precisely onto the slit, and how I keep it there for the duration of the exposure. If you don't want to miss that video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Alright, let me show you where each of the components I just talked about is located. Here you can see the guiding module. The slit is located right here. The collimating lens is approximately here. The diffraction grating is located underneath this wheel, and it can be removed and swapped out. So right now I have a 2400 lines per millimeter grating, but I can replace it with a 300 lines per millimeter grating to lower the resolution and increase the sensitivity of the spectrograph. And finally, the objective lens is approximately here. This component right here is a structural component that increases the stiffness of the spectrograph, which is critical for our application. All the mechanical components of the spectrograph, with the exception of the two helical focusers and some standard M42 or M48 adapters, are 3D printed using PETG. It is strongly recommended to avoid PLA because experiments have shown that PLA is transparent to infrared radiation, while PETG is not. There are about 25 parts to print. Most of them are relatively straightforward and should not cause any problem. Overall, this is not a hugely difficult project to print. To assemble the spectrograph, you will also need to purchase a few brass inserts, which are commonly used in 3D printing, and also some metric nuts and bolts, which I sourced from McMaster-Carr. The spectrograph can be printed using a budget 3D printer. I used a Creality Ender 3 V2, which is a popular and affordable 3D printer, and with a little bit of patience and perseverance, it is possible to get great results. But if you don't own a 3D printer, don't worry, there is another solution. You can ask a 3D printing company to manufacture the parts for you. Now, I would not trust any 3D printing company for this job because of its unique nature and the tight tolerances that it requires. But I have heard great things from a French company named Azure 3D Print, and the reason I mention this company is because its owner, Vincent Duchesne, is himself an amateur astronomer, and he has already built over 100 Solex or Starex spectrographs. His prices seem competitive and he ships internationally, so I would recommend going that route if 3D printing feels a little bit too intimidating for you. To assemble the spectrograph, you can refer to the Solex website, and I will put a link to the English version right here, as well as the assembly videos produced by Christian Buil and published on his YouTube channel. Those videos are in French, but just by watching how Christian assembles the various parts, you should be able to get the gist of it. And if you have any questions, you can always ask on the Solex mailing list, where many people will be more than willing to help you. Okay, now I'd like to answer some of your questions and maybe debunk a few misconceptions about amateur spectroscopy that I've read in online forums. I recently saw a few messages posted on the Cloudy Nights forum where people were doubting the ability of amateur astronomers to contribute to science, so I feel compelled to address this. I am a complete beginner in spectroscopy, and yet I have already contributed several spectra to a ProAM research database, and these are used by astrophysicists to refine their stellar models. There is a lot that you can do. Don't think that you are going to make a groundbreaking discovery though, but one thing that is important to note is that a lot of objects that professionals want to study are within the reach of amateur astronomers. And professionals simply do not have the ability to constantly monitor a large number of targets because it's simply too costly in terms of telescope time. But as amateur astronomers, we have that ability, especially if we do it together. And we can collectively contribute data points that then allow professional astronomers to better understand our universe. I am aware of plenty of scientific papers that have been published in the last 20 years where professional astronomers credit amateur astronomers for providing them with the data that they needed in order to understand a phenomenon. If you want to learn more about this, I invite you to watch this video on the YouTube channel of Cheliac Instruments, where François Cochard and Olivier Garde talk about the many opportunities that we have as amateurs to contribute to various scientific research programs. In that video, Olivier covers many fascinating objects that amateur astronomers can target to collect precious scientific data that can then be used by professionals. These include things like BE stars, novae and supernovae, pulsating variable stars, symbiotic stars, microquasars, active galactic nuclei, and so much more. You do not need a large and expensive telescope to practice spectroscopy. You can use a small refractor, a very affordable 5-inch Maksutov-Cassegrain telescope, an 8-inch Newtonian or Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope. Basically, you can use the equipment that you already have if you are already into astrophotography. But there are a few things that you need to know. First, most spectrographs require a specific focal ratio to work well. Starex, in its high-resolution configuration, works best with a focal ratio of around 10. So if you have a Newtonian telescope open at f4, for example, you will need to use a Barlow lens. The second thing is that if you want to take low-resolution spectra, you will probably want to use a mirrored telescope. A Ricci-Chrétien telescope is ideal for that because it does not contain any refractive elements and it usually has a fairly high focal ratio, which works well with most spectrographs. An SCT or a Maksutov-Cassegrain telescope would also work very well. Refractors are not ideal for low-resolution spectroscopy because of their chromatism, especially in the blue part of the spectrum, although refractors usually perform very well in the near-infrared. And finally, know that for a given spectrograph, a smaller telescope will yield a higher resolution. I know it sounds surprising at first, but it's true. And it's literally the opposite of astrophotography. And that's because a small telescope will have a short focal length. And that means that the image of a star will be small, which in turn means that you can use a narrower slit. So for example, let's say that you have an 80mm refractor at f7 and an average 2 arcsecond seeing, you should be able to use a 10 micron slit, which will yield a resolution of almost 40,000 with StarX in its high resolution configuration. 40,000 is extremely high resolution. To give you an idea, 40,000 is what professionals obtain with their equipment. With the same configuration and seeing conditions, on my 5-inch telescope, which has a 900mm focal length, I use a 19 micron slit, which means that my resolution dips under 20,000. The flip side is that a large telescope is able to collect more light and therefore allows you to study dimmer objects. And that is why professional astronomers always want more aperture. If you wanted to do high-resolution spectroscopy with a very large telescope, you would need a giant spectrograph, quite literally the size of a small building. Professional astronomers use fiber optics to send the light from the telescope to the spectrograph, which is usually stored in a climate-controlled room, sometimes quite a distance away from the telescope. So, in a nutshell, small telescopes have a big advantage in terms of resolution, although you are limited to targets that are relatively bright, say brighter than magnitude 9 or 10 for my setup. Light pollution is not as much of a problem with spectroscopy as it is with astrophotography. If you focus on high-resolution spectroscopy, especially in the red part of the spectrum, or in the near-infrared, you don't have to worry about light pollution all that much. But if you want to capture low-resolution spectra, light pollution can be a bigger problem. Software like ISIS or SpecNT will subtract the background sky from your spectra, sort of like DBE in PixInsight, if you will. Even professional astronomers acquiring spectra from the top of Mauna Kea in Hawaii have to subtract the background sky because of airglow. But you will be left with noise, and that can be a problem, especially on dim targets. Also, in spectroscopy, unlike traditional astrophotography, you cannot compensate for a low signal-to-noise ratio by adding data over several nights, because spectra can change very quickly, often in a matter of a few hours. So in the end, don't worry too much about light pollution, especially in the beginning, because you can still capture quality spectra for many years without any issue from a light polluted location like where I live. Up until recently, if you wanted to get started in spectroscopy with a commercial spectrograph like an LP600 or a LIRES 3, you had to spend upwards of $3,000 to purchase the spectrograph, a guiding module, a calibration system, all that on top of a telescope, a mount, a cooled CCD or CMOS camera, a guide camera, and so on. So we were talking about some serious cash. But with StarX, especially if you already have a 3D printer, spectroscopy has become a lot more affordable. You can make this spectrograph for about $500 more or less, which makes spectroscopy available to a much greater number of people. Alright, that's all I have for you today. I am going to include a few links in the description below, including one to the Solex and StarX website and Christian Buell's YouTube channel, as well as the English-speaking Solex mailing list, to which you can subscribe if you want to ask questions. I will be back in a few weeks with another video on the topic of amateur spectroscopy. So until next time, thank you for watching.